Hey, welcome back, everybody. Happy Wednesday. Great to see you out there. I've got a big time update for you on multiple major stories here in the weather department. First off, the tropics continuing here into the middle of November with the potential of a major hurricane that could strike the United States in as little as 7 days. Now, the other big story, a big time outbreak of Arctic air likely on the way that is going to dive into the lower 48. And as crazy as it sounds, these two could link up to create quite the storm system here towards the middle of the month and not long before Thanksgiving. So a lot of impacts likely to be felt across the country over the next 10 days and a very busy pattern. Now, this is only the beginning of it, folks. Obviously, winter is ahead, and that's kind of the busy season here for most of us. So if you haven't already subscribed, go ahead and do so. Hit that bell for the latest notifications, like the video, and comment. Let me know where you're watching from. Now, a couple disclaimers here at the beginning of the video. One, I do apologize that I've not been very active in the comments. I have a test that is extremely important tomorrow, so I've been pulling very long days and late nights over the past week preparing for that. Also, my apartment is out of internet currently, so I'm recording this off of my mobile hotspot, which hopefully does enough to get us through the video and hopefully uploads this in a reasonable time. So again, I apologize about those things, but it's the college life. You work with what you have and you do your best. So with that said, let's go ahead and dive into things. And let's start with the tropics, because again, I think this is a huge story. And again, don't want to overshadow that pattern change. We're going to talk about it, but the tropics is going to be more of a direct threat in the more near term. So we'll start here on satellite imagery down into the Caribbean. And you'll notice this storm system is already getting its act together, folks. A pretty well-defined kind of a core here of thunderstorm activity, and the hurricane hunters are expected to fly into this sometime this afternoon to collect data and find out if we officially have our next name on the list, which is Sarah. So if you hear me say the word Sarah, I'm talking about what is soon to become a hurricane over the rest of this week, and then bring direct impacts sometime early to the middle of next week. All right, so we can see, again, what is soon to be Sarah as well on satellite imagery. That was infrared. This is the visible. And again, you can kind of already tell it's getting that look. And if you're kind of new here and you're saying, well, what is that look? Well, this is the shrimp look, as I and probably many other people call it as well. So consider this blue or that kind of purple dot you see as the center or the head or kind of the eye of the shrimp. And then this is kind of the tail of the shrimp. And you'll notice this is often a sign of a system that is getting its act together, beginning to strengthen, and on its way to becoming a much stronger system. And that's exactly what this is going to do. National Hurricane Center now has this bumped up to a 90% chance of development within the next 48 hours. So all but certain here that we are going to get a named storm. And I'll also mention, you see this little area here that has this kind of perfect little naked swirl. That is not going to form very likely, but kind of cool to show on satellite. So just a kind of interesting little tidbit there. But again, the big area is this big thunderstorm kind of complex and areas of showers and storminess over the southern Caribbean. Now, one question you and myself is asking, in fact, I'll go ahead and make a disclaimer now. I was in class yesterday doing a briefing in synoptic meteorology, which is definitely my favorite class, and it's kind of basically everything I do on this channel is what that class is all about. And I was talking about this hurricane. It was the day I had to give the briefing, and my professor was like, that's kind of funny. I remember a certain YouTuber saying the last one was going to be the last storm. And I will definitely take blame on that one. Got that one wrong for sure. But the good news is I'm young, so I'm allowed to get a couple things wrong. In fact, that's why we have the student meteorologist tag under the name and not full meteorologist yet, although luckily well on my way because I am quite excited to get to that stage. But anyway, back on topic here. So taking a look at the sea surface temperatures, this is one of the reasons that our last storm, Raphael, will not end up being the last storm of the season, is these very warm ocean temperatures down into the Caribbean. I mean, we have some temperatures still up near 30 degrees Celsius. That's in the upper 80s in Fahrenheit, folks. Which is more than enough to contribute to strengthening. Now, a couple other things I want you to notice here as well is notice kind of this eddy that kind of comes out of the Caribbean and up into the Gulf a little bit. I guess I could have picked a color you could see a little bit better here, but that kind of loops up that way. That could be important depending on the track of Sarah. If Sarah takes a track that misses the Yucatan and hits the gap here, that gives even more time for the storm to have favorable sea surface temperatures before eventually, the further north you get into the Gulf, the cooler the waters get, and in fact actually get cool enough that it's almost unfavorable for development right along the immediate coastline of the Gulf Coast of kind of Louisiana there, all the way back down to Florida. So that is something we will need to watch, but in the near term, very favorable sea surface temperatures for development. Another favorable kind of ingredient here are the upper level winds. And you'll notice here, this is kind of getting into tomorrow afternoon as our storm is likely getting named here, or really overnight tonight into tomorrow. These are the upper level winds at about 200 millibars. So these are well above the surface, almost kind of, as far up as you can get here. And what you're seeing is one, very light winds over the Caribbean, but also diverging winds. So what I mean by that is all of these streamlines you see, which are basically just these lines with arrows at the end of them that I'm drawing out here, these are wind directions above. And what you're noticing is they're all separating or diverging. And I want you to think about a big pool of water. If you put your hands in the pool and you start scooping away, or you start diverging that water, what does it create? It creates a bit of a void, and that's exactly what's going to happen in the atmosphere here. That void is going to cause rising motion at the surface. That's going to enhance thunderstorm activity. That's going to lower the pressure values and begin that feedback loop of latent heat release that is going to continuously strengthen this hurricane while it's under these very favorable upper level conditions. Now, that's something that's going to last for a while as well, folks. You'll notice I moved this ahead into time. Still very calm winds over the Caribbean and even the Gulf of Mexico before eventually the storm finally gets scooped up by some upper level winds. And again, that's our big pattern change that we're going to talk about. We'll talk about it more here in a second. But again, very favorable upper level wind conditions. Now, another favorable thing that we're looking at for this storm is moisture content, at least currently in the Caribbean. Very high levels of moisture, high relative humidity values. You'll notice all this green and kind of bluish color showing up down here. This indicates to me the storm is going to have plenty of thunderstorm fuel, if you will, or just moisture to create and feed these thunderstorms. And that's going to allow the storm to become pretty symmetric in nature. That combined with the upper level winds and the high sea surface temperatures, you get a look that suggests the storm really could go quite the distance and probably, I'm not going to say probably, but at least has a chance to break plenty of records for November hurricanes. As this one, again, could very well get into that major hurricane status. Now, the good news, I do think on down the road, once we get past this weekend and into early next week, there will be a big shield of dry air to the north of the storm in the Gulf of Mexico. And this should help us out a little bit. Now, unfortunately, depending on how strong the storm gets beforehand will matter a lot. If it kind of cocoons itself in its own moist bubble, then this dry air won't be able to do as much to help us out. But again, a huge cold front is going to be scooping south and hopefully add just enough kind of dry air there that maybe that can disrupt the surface of the storm at least a little bit. And that will be one limiting factor for this storm that we will have to monitor. All right, what about steering currents? That's obviously another big question with a big storm like this. Well, currently, if we look at kind of the level in the atmosphere that shows our steering currents, I'll move this ahead just a little bit at a time. This is getting into this weekend. So you'll notice at this point, the storm is forming down here, and I know it's super small, but that little kind of blow up of wind down there, that is what would be Sarah Saturday morning on the GFS here. And the pattern is a blocking pattern in general to the north of the storm. So you'll notice we have a little bit of a ridge here over the Gulf of Mexico. And what that does is kind of prevents the storm from moving into it. It's kind of, imagine a force field of sorts. But what is likely to happen later next week is that force field of sorts kind of moves away. Again, this is kind of the peak of it right here. This is Sunday into Monday. Notice this big closed off height value here. Indicating, again, a pocket of some ridging there and kind of warmer air preventing the storm from moving north. But again, it'll keep the storm down into the Caribbean for a while. But as we get later into next week, that ridge moves off to the east. And what happens is a big trough scoops down, pulls the storm north, and then eventually slingshots it kind of eastbound here, somewhere either over the state of Florida and or into Cuba and potentially into the Bahamas. And you'll notice that kind of that process beginning here. Again, the ridge moving to the east. At that point, it pushes the storm into the Yucatan, at least on this run of the GFS, gets it into the Gulf, and then here comes that big trough here, as you can see, with these very bright colors. Again, all sorts of strong winds into this thing, and then that slingshots it towards the state of Florida. Now, I will mention here, by showing you the European model, which is very similar in the near term, unless I did not pull up the European. Oh, I did. I see what I did here. Sorry. I'm going to change it up a little bit on you. So that was the GFS steering currents. And in the ensembles, you can see that same general idea. And then I'll show you the European and the European ensembles. Sorry, you'd think I would remember what kind of order I put these maps in. But again, storm forms down into the Caribbean, loops for a while, kind of meanders a little bit as we have that big ridge above it. But then after that, again, the ridge moves east past Florida. And at that point, the steering turns like this. And what that is likely to do is, again, shove this either into the Yucatan or into potentially kind of extreme western Cuba or into the strait between the Yucatan and Cuba. Now, the worst case scenario obviously would be that this kind of goes right in between and never hits land and then gets shoved towards Florida. But I think right now the most likely scenario is this develops into a pretty strong hurricane, strikes the Yucatan, weakens some, then gets back over the Gulf and shoved towards the state of Florida, as you can see on the GFS ensembles here. Now, the European is very similar in general here, but there is one difference I want you to note. Again, same story. Here's the ridge kind of blocking the storm. This is Sunday into Monday, again, kind of keeping it down here. But eventually, as this ridge pulls east, that again moves the flow kind of more southerly to south or out of the southeast. And that'll shove it likely into the Yucatan or again just into the gap between the Yucatan and Cuba, or potentially, again, depending on the orientation of this ridge, maybe even the extreme western tip of Cuba. But the thing I want you to notice here is after it does that, what's different on the European is the orientation of our trough. You'll notice it's a lot further west here than the GFS model was. In fact, I'll pull it back just a little bit here. This is Wednesday. This is Wednesday morning, so let me back this up to the exact time. It's technically Tuesday evening, actually. This is what the GFS looked like in the upper levels. This is what the European looks like in the upper levels. GFS, European. What do you notice? Well, on the European, the trough is much deeper, and it's also much further west. So what that creates is a lot more room for error here on how far north the storm gets when it gets pushed towards Florida, and kind of, the timing as well. So because of that, when we look at the European ensemble members, you'll notice we have a lot more members that kind of pull this even further north into Florida with a much wider range from Cuba all the way up into the Big Bend of Florida. So exactly where the storm goes is still not nailed down. But again, you'll kind of notice the differences in our global models and how that's bringing a difference in the steering pattern and how that could affect the eventual track of Sarah. Now, that's the track side of things. What about the intensity side of things? Again, I talked about the ingredients for intensity, but what do the models say? Well, we'll kind of breeze through this here, pretty quickly. But the GFS, again, develops a storm very quickly into a hurricane by really Friday afternoon. So the GFS says nothing to a hurricane within the next 48 hours. Again, that ridge kind of blocks it for a little bit, but eventually that ridge moves east enough, slingshots this into the Yucatan as a major hurricane. This would be Monday evening, and then gets back over the Gulf by Tuesday morning, again, as a tropical storm probably at that point due to land interaction, and then re-strengthens somewhat, but moves it east here, and that trough picks it up, brings it much further south than maybe the European showed with its upper level map into the Keys here as a probably Category 2 hurricane with that sort of pressure intensity. And then that's when things get a little bit crazy, and we'll talk about exactly how crazy here in just a moment. The European model, again, a similar kind of idea here, develops this into a hurricane, impacts the Yucatan Peninsula as a major hurricane. This is Monday afternoon on the European, so similar timing for the GFS, maybe a 6-hour difference, but you would expect that at this sort of range. And then by the next morning, back over the Gulf of Mexico, re-strengthens a bit, and then we have a hurricane landfall on the European, again, further north, and you would expect that due to the difference in the upper level wind environment I showed you, this time kind of up in between Fort Myers and Tampa, with, again, a strong Category 2 storm, and then crosses the I-4 corridor, basically much like Milton did earlier this year, and then gets back out into the Atlantic and moves away. So again, it's going to be a very active time ahead, and like I said, there's a chance that Sarah, what I just showed you, links up with that big cold shot that is steering the storm, and that's what we'll talk about here in a moment in the second half of this video. But before we get there, let's do our Meteorology in Minutes segment that is new to the channel, and I'm going to make it pretty brief today because, again, This video is already going to be crazy long because of everything ongoing. But we'll do meteorology in minutes, and then we'll talk about the near term. And then we'll talk about that big pattern change. So here we go. What's happening out there today? Well, the big story is going to be this trough right in the central part of the country. And this is a pretty deep trough, very amplified, as we say, just meaning it's quite tall. So you'll notice up here is one ridge, here's another ridge, here is the trough kind of in between. And you'll notice kind of the difference or the height here between these two is very large. And that means the trough is very amplified. Another thing about this trough is the way it's tilted. This is a very neutrally tilted trough, meaning I can kind of draw an up and down line through the trough axis there. It's not tilted one way or tilted the other like some troughs are. And because of that, this is going to be a trough that produces a kind of average storm system, we'll say. Not a super strong one, not a super weak one. And again, this is our diverging side. This is where you would expect storming weather. This is our converging side. This is where you would expect high pressure. And if we move to the surface map, that's exactly what you get. Again, high pressure right here on the converging side, and then stormy weather on the diverging side of that trough. And then also you'll see major high pressure out into the east on the other kind of converging side of another trough. Again, this is also a converging side of another trough out here that's kind of off the screen. But again, kind of all connects there. So there's your meteorology in minutes segment of the day. All right, watches, warnings, advisories, what's falling from the sky, a little bit of everything here for you today. Right now, the big theme in the east is ongoing fire danger today through much of the northeast. So you got to have a way to get those watches, warnings, and advisories. That will definitely be a concern out here. The other kind of thing you'll notice is the precipitation beginning. As that storm system associated with that trough begins, you'll notice widespread rain showers up and down the Great Plains, even into portions of the Mississippi River Valley through Memphis all the way down south to New Orleans. And then out west, our next big storm system beginning to move in with plenty of mountain snow and valley rain. So it's going to be an active little stretch here kind of coming up in the near future. So let's time it out for you. We'll start in the east. Again, this afternoon stays pretty quiet, but it is going to be chilly through all these cities and communities east of the Appalachia chain. Classic cold air damming setup. In fact, you'll notice I'm wearing kind of vest here for the first time this year, as highs are only going to get up into the 50s in Charlotte due to this very cold air getting pumped down from our high pressure. Now, as that is occurring, here comes our storm system that is going to kind of begin to bring rain back through the Mississippi River Valley into Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, through Kentucky, even into much of the day today, and especially into the overnight. Now, overnight tonight, once we start passing kind of the midnight hour, this big shield of rain will kind of cross the Appalachia chain, and it's at this point we do need to monitor for the potential of a little bit of ice that could try to begin through the highest terrains of Virginia and West Virginia. Again, a very cold air mass in place currently. That could lead to some icing overnight tonight into tomorrow morning. But other than that, really just a very dreary, wet, cold, damp day for your Thursday from South Carolina northbound into the northeast as this swings on through. But a lot of rain probably going to fall for some folks, half an inch to an inch, maybe even upwards of 2 inches on the southern side of this where there's a little bit more moisture through Alabama, through Georgia, through the Carolinas. Again, a very wet day tomorrow and could bring, again, some pretty heavy rain totals out of it. This gets us through Thursday evening here, still raining up and down the eastern seaboard. But the storm system is going to, instead of kind of pulling through the northeast like some of our past couple storms have done, is going to kind of get to Ohio and then move it southward through the Carolinas is where the center of this low pressure is going to be. And again, that's why I'm expecting the heaviest rain totals down here kind of in that circled area on your map. It's still going to rain to the north of there. Maryland going to get some rain out of this. Pennsylvania. The only places that you'll notice aren't really getting rain out of this is New England, but that'll change. Again, that storm begins to move offshore by Friday morning here, but you'll notice another storm system going to kind of swing on through by the start of the weekend, and we'll talk about that one here in just a moment. But before we get there, let's talk about what's going on out west. Actually, you know what, before we do that, let me show you the ice totals, because I should have done this beforehand. I don't know why I moved this at a different point in the sequence. But again, that potential for some ice in West Virginia tomorrow morning, this model's probably overdoing it a little bit, but I do think places could see 1/10 of an inch, upwards of 2/10 of an inch of ice that could begin to accrete on some of those trees and power lines. So you'll need to watch for that tomorrow morning. Again, a very small area here, but if you happen to live there, definitely something that is worth mentioning for you folks. All right, now let's talk about the West Coast. Again, not quite out here either. Another storm system working on through a heavy mountain snow, very convective rain bands this afternoon, moving through the Pacific Northwest and into the northern Rockies. This continues overnight tonight. By the time you're waking up Thursday, more of the same. The showers working on through, whether that be snow or rain. You're going to see a little bit of both probably. And that kind of just continues throughout our Thursday afternoon into Friday evening. And you'll notice here kind of begins the start of another storm system that is likely going to cross a part of the country and bring more active weather east of the Rockies by early next week. All right, did briefly want to talk about you folks up in Eastern Canada. Like I said, another storm system on the way, and we're going to kind of breeze through this because, again, we're strapped on time here. But here it comes. Again, has the potential to bring some ice. This is going to be early Friday morning, you'll notice, potentially ice from Canada into New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, well up here into Eastern Canada, seeing some of that pink showing up on the map. And this will work in through much of the day Friday. You'll notice that quick band of some freezing rain or sleet, even getting into Maine, into New Hampshire, Vermont, and kind of through much of Eastern Canada here. Going to have a pretty good little ice storm out of this one. And something we'll need to watch that'll last through Friday and even into Saturday. And if we take a look at some of those ice totals, if you will, we're talking potentially 10 to 20 millimeters of ice accretion, isolated spots up near 30 maybe, into this kind of northeastern section of Canada. And honestly, I'm not entirely sure what this part of Canada is called. So you folks that live up there, definitely let me know. But you'll even see ice beginning to accrete here into Newfoundland and even into New Brunswick, and again, portions of northern Maine as well. For you folks that want to convert this from millimeters to something else, this is probably going to be a glaze to 1/10 of an inch of ice for you folks up here into northern Maine and into northern New Hampshire as well. So kind of a sneaky little setup that I don't think a lot of people are talking about, excuse me, but will be important for you folks up that way. All right, here we go. We've got about 9 minutes, hopefully, to fit in, or I guess 8 minutes now, the longer I talk, to fit in this pattern change. And again, it's going to be a bit of a doozy here for some folks, and we'll kind of time it out for you. Let's back this up. This is the GFS ensembles. And again, you'll notice here's that storm system currently working through the west. You'll see all that blue, that troughing. That swings on through, but behind it, by the time we get into early next week, another big dumping of cold air. This one, though, looks to move all the way through the plains. This is Tuesday afternoon, and then eventually really deepen and set up shop by about a week or so from now into the eastern half of the country. And this could really be the first big shot of the year, I think, in the cold department for a lot of folks in the east. Again, we had a very mild October, a mild beginning of November. That should change, though, as this works on through into your Wednesday and Thursday of next week. And this could hang around for a while as well. This gets us all the way into next weekend, that blue holding on for dear life, and even stays, kind of active potentially even a little bit closer to Thanksgiving, according to some of our models. Now, it's not the only model showing it. This is the European model, same thing. Again, early next week moves through the Pacific Northwest. Again, dives a little bit further south quicker than the GFS, and that's one of the reasons we had a different track in Sarah as well. So we'll definitely need to iron out those details, but same idea. A big trough, a big block of cold air basically parking itself over the eastern half of the country. And this could do so in the way of a big cutoff low. And what do I mean by that? Well, basically, I just mean it's kind of the area is going to get cut off from the rest of the jet stream. And that oftentimes can lead to pretty wacky weather and tough to forecast weather. Now, probably the big question you have is, well, what are the chances I get snow out of this? So let's take a look at that. This is the chance of at least an inch of snow falling within a 24-hour period, according to the GFS ensemble members. And then we'll show you the Euro ensemble members, and then we'll show you kind of what this could look like at the surface. So here we go. Again, very snowy out into the Rockies through much of this weekend. Stays snowy out there early next week as that big block of cold air moves through. And then you'll notice snowfall chances increase pretty significantly into the northern plains, anywhere from Kansas, especially up into Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, and into the Dakotas here by Tuesday evening of next week. And then this moves over the Great Lakes, and that Great Lake effect snow machine really cranks up according to the models here. I mean, this is a 70% chance of at least an inch of snow falling in the purples here, and then running about a 40% in the blue colors here. So again, this would make sense. You get a big block of cold air to kind of move over this region. And then you get kind of the flow out of the correct areas, and that fetch, as we call it, or that flow of cold air over these lakes, the distance of it at least becomes quite large, and you get that lake effect snow. And I'll even add, the lakes are very warm still. We, again, had a very warm kind of fall. So this is really going to increase the instability here. And we could see some pretty insane lake effect if the setup stays correct. Now, it really takes a lot of ingredients to line up, but it's about that time of year. And you'll even notice the models indicating here that we could get some northwest flow snow out of this. You're seeing snowfall chances as far south as the Smokies and up into Virginia, West Virginia, even potentially some of the models showing the Cumberland Plateau getting in on at least some chance of some flakes flying out of this pattern here. And I think it's a very real possibility. Now, the other thing, I think those two things are pretty well set in stone. I think Great Lake effect snow. I think some northwest flow snow. I think potentially some sort of snowstorm in the northern plains next week. Here's the wild card. I talked about Sarah and how that could get a little exciting, and you'll notice how these snowfall totals even increase kind of outside, or at least the chances of snowfall, I should say, increase even outside of lake effect areas of the Northeast. There is a very real chance, and I'll show you with the GFS model, that this could lead to some sort of storm forming. Now, let me show you what that would look like. So we'll move this ahead into time. This is this week, and you'll notice one quick little storm moves on through the northern Great Plains. That could bring a little bit of snow maybe, but that's really just an appetizer for what next week brings. Here we go. Here's that big trough. It dumps down south. We get a storm to form off of it. This is around next Monday and Tuesday. Again, a pretty feisty storm here. This could bring some severe weather with it as well. But then that cold air catches up to it, and we get a big-time snowstorm on the GFS, at least here, through the northern Great Plains. That kind of starts this pattern change, and then all of this cold air rushes down behind it. There's Sarah. Again, impacts Florida. So here's Sarah. Here is our huge upper-level trough. Again, all of this is a lot of cold air kind of behind that trough or within it. And what happens is the two pieces of energy kind of get tangled together a little bit, phase together, and you get what ends up being a pretty big nor'easter that rides up the coast and taps into some of that cold air. And you'll notice kind of a crazy winter storm solution showing up here on this model through portions of the east in 7 to 10 days. Now, is that guaranteed? Is that going to happen? No, but it is a distinct possibility that we'll want to watch for. And again, it could lead to, some Hurricane Sandy type effects. Now, I don't want to compare this to Sandy. Again, I'm not saying that's going to happen, but what I am saying is it's the right synoptic setup for some sort of mischief like that to occur. And if I show you the European model, again, same story here. Next week, big storm develops in the plains, turns into quite the snowstorm for somebody in the plains. Again, who that is, we'll see. But the difference here, again, the two pieces of energy are more separated. There's Sarah, here's our trough. You'll notice a lot more space between the two, and because of that, they don't end up merging, but we do still get Great Lake effect snow and northwest flow snow and very cold temperatures in the east. So again, the question will be, how does that evolve? How does it play out? Do we get some sort of huge snowstorm out of this? That's the real question mark, but I am feeling confident. Snow somewhere in the plains early next week, lake effect snow and northwest flow later next week, and then potentially 10 days or so from now, we could get a big one if the ingredients line up. Now, temperatures, again, kind of chilly couple of days in the east due to cold air damming. Then we warm up by the weekend. This is next Monday. You'll notice a lot more red showing up on your map, but not for long as that blue takes over by the middle of next week. Again, that big cold shot of air going to bring temperatures probably back down below average by 10, 20 degrees, maybe even more than that in spots. So it's going to start to feel a lot more like winter compared to fall for a lot of folks this time next week. And again, that cold air hangs on for a while here on some of our models. So that is the latest, folks. That's what I got for you on this. What is it again? It is Wednesday, I think. And again, sorry if there were any technical difficulties. And it has been a long week for me. So if I kind of seem out of it or I'm just kind of repeating the same things, hopefully you can bear with me. But with that said, y'all have a wonderful, see, there we go again. Y'all have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you all tomorrow.